Okay, so the first part of the program, we're going to start out with a presentation of the Mayor Legacy website. And to tell us about that, we have Clive Adams and his son Eruch Adams. Clive has first had contact with Meher Baba while he was in jail in Southern California in 1967. Upon his release in 1968, Clive quickly found out who Baba was and realized he was the one who had visited him while he was in jail, and immediately signed up to attend the 1969 Great Darshan. Clive will share a few anecdotes from his almost 50 years with Baba related to the subject of our meeting, followed by comments about the Mayor Legacy website. Eruch Adams grew up in a Baba family. Eruch was around Baba centers and Sahavases his whole life. His background in computers and interest in preserving history and photographs led him to help his father with the Mayor Legacy project. He was only a small child in 1980 when the Mandali issued these warnings, but because he has worked with so many young Baba lovers over his 17-year tenure as a youth Sahavas, and he has lived in Walnut Creek for over a year, he approaches this topic with a different and much valued perspective than those who have lived through it. Welcome, Eruch and Clive. Thank you.
Jai Baba, thank you all for coming. You are the brave ones. Let's see, in December of 2013, I was in India for a couple months. I got back in January of 2014. And while I was in India, I was doing a study of the origins of Lord Mayor. And the funny thing is that all the years I'd known Hermes, I'd never, ever heard the backstory. I'd never been able to ask him questions. So I was investigating Lord Mayor, and I'm very intrigued by the whole evolution of that incredible work. And I read 10 volumes while I was in India, and I was amazed at the richness of the material. And in spite of maybe some flaws, the book is it's a one of a kind. So when I came back from India, I called up Ursula because I knew she knew Hermes, and we were having a wonderful discussion about India and Hermes and memories. And I don't know how it happened. Something that was said triggered my curiosity, and she mentioned a folder or file that she had been holding or protecting all these years since 1980 that Eruch and Mani had made a point of her keeping, called the Wolf and Sheep file. And when she said Wolf and Sheep file, something just triggered in my brain, and I just went, I got to see this. And the next thing I know, I'm over at Ursula's house, and I started reading it actually while I was there, and I got so intrigued. And I asked Ursula some questions that her answers were very, very startling to me, because I couldn't believe that this story had been suppressed the last 35 years. That's what floored me. The moment I started looking at this, and then I asked Ursula if she would let me scan, digitize, organize, and retitle some of the documents. So I went through, for the next 2 months, starting in January of 2014, scanning it and sending copies to my son Eruch. And I didn't know that Eruch was going to take an interest in this at all. In fact, I wasn't even expecting him to take an interest. It was really academic at this point for me. It wasn't there was no project in mind per se, But the more I read, the more intrigued I got, and I realized there was a world-class story here. And I began to wonder if there wasn't a counter-narrative. In other words, I was so early into the study, I had no idea what all this meant. It was just preliminary research. But the deeper I went into it, I began to think, all these years I've heard about Sufism since 1968, actually, and I've met Murshida, I've met a lot of the people that we all know from those days, but I never really knew anything about Sufism. I didn't know how it evolved. I didn't know why Baba put so much energy into it. It was sort of like outside off my radar. So as I got deeper into it, I realized there's some real interesting stuff here. And I began to question whether everything that we've heard all these years and assumed to be true was really true. And so before I get into the Meher Legacy Project I need to just share a few anecdotes or snapshots from experiences that happened over my lifetime with Baba that were random experiences. I never gave any great significance to them until I started looking at this material. The first one was that after I got back from Darshan in 1969, I noticed that in L.A. a lot of my friends, close Baba friends, quite a number of them were going up to San Francisco to attend the Sufi classes. And this was the first time I thought about Sufism with any seriousness, and I thought, gosh, I wonder if I'm missing something. What's attracting all these people up there? So I thought about it, and one day I was about to seriously consider coming up to attend one of the classes when I had an epiphany. It was a voice in my head said, "Clive, you have a direct link with Meher Baba. He's your mentor, your guide, and your master. You have no need for intermediaries." And somehow, this is all in my head, but it was like an epiphany or a minor revelation. It was so profound that I knew it was true, and the whole subject went out of my head. I mean, it was like I never had an issue about it again. And at that time, I had not read anything about Sufism. I had not, the idea of indirect versus direct didn't mean anything to me. But I just followed my inner guidance on the subject. Then, in late 1969, this is not directly related, but indirectly related. I was in a major car accident, and 2 Baba lovers were killed that I was with, and the post-Darshan honeymoon ended just like that. And it initiated this whole new phase. Right after that, Meherji and Adi came, and I went with them to Meher Mount and then to the Sufi Center in San Francisco. And this was my first contact with Sufism. And I knew nothing at all about Murshida or Sufism. I had no history at all. And so we go into the Sufi Center on Sutter Street, and this is sometime in 1970. After my accident, I'm still on crutches, by the way, and Murshida meets us at the elevator. And so before we are going to get in the elevator, Murshida says, well, she pointed at me, I think, and she said, he's not a Sufi, he can't come. It's a private meeting. And it's open to Sufis only. Adi tells Murshida, if Clive cannot participate, then as he, Adi, and Meherji and Jack Small are not Sufis, then if Clive can't go, they're not going also. Murshida relented. And so I went to that meeting. The next little snapshot was I went to India in 1970 and 71 for 4 months. While I was there, I stayed at Vilu Villa most of the time, except a little bit at Lower Mehrabad. While I was at Vilu Villa, the Mandali would come to Vilu's house every day. Lawyers would show up. There was a very high level of excitement going on. Basically, what was happening was the Mandali, the Kudam Shastri event or incident was in full swing. Now, this was a guy who was the first chairman of the Trust of India, of the Avatar Meher Baba Trust. And so what had happened was he had been accused of embezzling money, and he had tried to strong-arm the Mandali out of the trust, and it was a big, huge legal fight. This is 1970. Baba has barely dropped the body 5 minutes ago. And there's lawyers everywhere. Sarosh is there, Mayorji's there. Everybody, I mean, Rana was there, Mani was there, Eruch was there. So every day they would come pouring into Vilu Villa for me, and Vilu would do a big meal, and we would hear the day's events and how Mani would imitate the lawyers and the judge, and it was hilarious. But I thought at the time, wow, no respite for the Mandali at all. And this went on for months, by the way. Now, one day I'm at Merazad. Eruch knows that I'm witnessing all this. And this is the first time this ever happened. Eruch pulls me aside, and he tells me that this is all his fault. and I said, but then he backs up. He said, when Baba was working on the trust deed, he kept trying to hint to Eruch that he wanted Eruch to be the chairman, the first chairman. And Eruch would deflect every intimation in that direction. He didn't. So one day at a men's meeting it was the worker meeting at Mehrabad, and Baba was there. It could have been, when was the trustee done? It was like 1959. Yeah, 59. So I believe that this was in 59. And Eruch told me this story, that he was sitting there with Baba on the porch at Lower Mehrabad, and Baba really brought up this thing of, Eruch, I want you to be the chairman of the... and Eruch said he said he couldn't. And Eruch told me at the time that the reason he couldn't was that he was so spent from all these tours all over India that he literally couldn't even comprehend taking this role. Okay. Anyway, so Baba said, this will come around your neck. That was what he said. And he made a thing like this, like a noose. And Eruch told me this story, and then shortly after all this happened, in fact, while it was happening, there was a split in the Baba in India. And remember, this is 1970 and 71. Basically, people were either against the Mandali or for the Mandali, and it created a literal schism in India. That was my first cautionary tale. There's so many stories here that I don't know what to tell you.
Why don't you tell a little bit about the Meher Legacy website?
The thing is, all of these lead up to... I didn't realize that it was going to... I'll let Eruch tell you about the website. I can share these anecdotes later.
Yeah, we won't get into the finish.
All right. No, I'm going to let you talk about the website.
Okay.
I didn't realize.
Can you all see that? Okay. So I came into this very indirectly, as Clive said. I really wasn't that interested in digging up a bunch of stuff. It really was vaguely interesting. I sort of I knew at some point we were going to have to scan a bunch of slides, and I have a lot of youth Sahava stuff. I was interested in archiving, but I wasn't really like, can't this wait, was sort of my thought. And then as soon as Clive found Ursula and Ed's archive, I thought, that's interesting, but again, why get into it? And then it was like 1 month later that Dr. Gower thing exploded, and I suddenly took an interest, as long as that was really going on, and I started reading documents and kind of trying to figure it out. And then once it died down, I said, I don't have time for this, and put it aside again. And then I don't know how long it was later, but not very long, that the really big thing happened over the board resolution. And again, I just thought, oh, what's this about? In fact, I ignored it. I was invited by the person who set it up, and I ignored it because all I saw was legalese, because it was the board resolution legalese, and I don't even know what this is. I don't live there. Put it aside. And anyways, the thing was, it was this odd series of resistance and pushback that kind of drew me in. Otherwise, I really don't have time, and I wouldn't have even bothered to read it, let alone try to build a website out of it. There's a lot of things. So I started to notice there's a certain timing, series of coincidences, and that kind of pushed it into being, and into happening quick. And actually, part of the reason the website actually happened was because there's so much information. I mean, we're only going to be able to outline and highlight a few things. There's so much information that even for me to understand it, I had to start thinking in terms of chronology, which thing happened first, and okay, first what did Baba say? And then I listened to the tapes, which was 5 hours, and even that, everything I found out and everything I read, it raised several new questions. So one thing I want to say is this is still a work in progress. I mean, there are whole swaths of time where there's just sort of missing gaps, and we hope to find more documentations and personal stories. But right now, how many people have already been to the website, just so I can get a sense of, okay. So it's pretty straightforward. Can I get a mic over here?
It's actually an incredible website.
Can you hear me? Okay. So the material in question, it's under archive, and first we start with Sufism Reoriented, and this has been building and developing, and get into the history of it, and make sure you can see it. Some of the early letters between Baba, dictated by various people, and even some of these have been updated. We have better copies now than we used to. This is from Adi. So a lot of it leading up to the charter, the development of the charter, and from there. Sorry, I'm going to scroll back here. The bell of warning is just sort of where I categorized basically the controversial, pretty much from about 1979, give or take, what happened that led the Mandali, some of the early information they got, and what they did about it, and how they initially, Mani just tried to deal with it directly through Ivy in 1979, say, hey, this sounds a little bit like you guys are losing focus here. And then it just follows in a very linear, and then the reply letters and what happened next. So you can pretty much follow it all the way down, and then they'll break into some of the letters back and forth. Robert Dreyfus was living in India. We can link to what we're going to be covering today later on, the big meeting between the 5 Sufis and the Mandali. And anyways, there's lots more detail, but all the recordings are on here. There's transcripts. You can really, as you have time, you can find out a lot more than what we're going to even be able to cover here. And and that's kind of the idea for this section, and over time I'm adding, in fact, yesterday I was adding, there's some incredible, what Baba said about saints and masters. In doing this, every day I'm finding something I've never read before, or at least never noticed before. So there's all kinds of great material that's going to be updated periodically. there's more to it, but I think that's enough said for now. Okay. How much? 7 minutes.
Do I have a...
You have 7 minutes.
Okay, good. This is another anecdote, and I noticed Joni Dimple's here, so this actually involves her father. In 1978, Phyllis Frederick called me up and said, "Clive, I would like you to drive me to the open house of the Cheesecake Factory, the very first one that it was ever opened. It was in Beverly Hills, and we turned out that I accompanied Phyllis Frederick, and it was mainly a Sufi event. David Overton was cooking all the food. It was a huge, big spread. And it was the very first Cheesecake Factory when it was really just beginning. And I was sitting across the table from Lud Dimple, and Phyllis was sitting, I believe, next to Lud. And Murshida was at the end of the table. Charmian was there, Duncan Knowles, all these Sufis, that many of whom I'd never met before. And at one point during the meal, Lud leans across the table to me. He seemed to be directing his conversation at me, and he said, in a very conspiratorial fashion, he said, "Well, you know, Ivy's infallible." And I'd never heard I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't a very religious person, so it didn't mean much to me at the time. But I looked at Phyllis because it seemed odd. It just seemed odd, and I didn't know what to make of it. And Phyllis, I saw her eyes rolling up in her head, and later that evening on the way home, I said, "Phyllis, what does this mean? What does this pretend? What did Lud mean by that?" And she said, "Well, there's a tendency for history to repeat itself when it comes to the Avatar. In fact, there's even stronger tendency when it comes to the Avatar." But she said, "I think Baba has an ace up his sleeve this time. I don't think history is going to repeat itself." But anyway, she said she was concerned. It was like I call it a red flag. There were red flags. I didn't know what Lud really meant by that. In his head, it might have meant something different. But the next incident was in 1980. Eruch was 3 years old, and the whole family went to India for Christmas at December of 1980. And it was right after the Sufi delegation had left in October. And it was still a buzz. Everyone was talking about this, of something that had just happened at Mandalay Hall involving the Mandalay. But I had 4 kids with me. I was preoccupied. I wasn't interested in anything to do with Sufism, but there was a genuine buzz going about it. And one day I'm at Merazad, and just like Eruch did before in 1971, he pulled me aside, and privately, I don't know why, he started telling me why he had spoken out about on the Sufism. And he could tell that. Well, first of all, he said, Baba made me Baba made me speak out publicly. It's not really my thing. I'm paraphrasing. But I was compelled by Baba to do it. And then I started to think in my mind, why is Eruch telling me this? Because I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not interested. And he could tell I wasn't really paying attention. And he grabbed me by the shoulder and he said, "Clive, you need to pay attention to this." And that part I remembered forever. It made an impact on me. But until recently, even a year ago, I knew nothing about this subject. It's whatever I've learned has been with Eruch in the last year. Then in 1994, I was in India again. I've been 27 times. And I hear a rumor that there's several hundred Sufis coming to India, or they're already here. And so Eruch again pulls me aside, and he said, he started to inform me of what was going on. Apparently there was an inauguration going on in South India. How do you pronounce it? Bairamangala. Anyway, it was Eruch told, again, privately, he told me about when all that great work Baba had done on the Universal Center at that location, but he said that Baba had told him that once that work was done, that location was of no further use, and it was finished. And Eruch said, what are they doing? What are they doing? He was like incredulous that a major center was being established. The Sufis were donating thousands of dollars, and a major center was being established. Eruch goes, he said, I don't get it. And anyway, there's a lot of these kind of things. None of them seem to be connected to each other until recently. When I asked Ursula about the name of this file, the Wolf and Sheep file, I asked her, how did that name come about? And she told me that Baba had named it the Wolf and Sheep file. And it was started apparently right after Ivy's first trip to India in 1948 at Baba's request, and Eruch kept that file. And that's what got my attention. So the Mayor Legacy Project really developed out of just looking at how much content, how much how significant the story really is. So our effort was to just bring it out to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive and Eruch. So next up, yes? Sure.
She's asking, under the Meher Legacy
Blog.
I'm going to go to it. Under the blog, can other people contribute to it? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. And you don't mean in the comments?
Well, I guess so. I don't know.
There is a comment section, but we're definitely open to if someone has something relevant to tie in, or I mean, so far Clive did the first one and I did one, and then what I've been trying to do is, as I add new material, in fact, sign up for the blog, because as I add new material, and who knows what it could be. I mean, people send us stuff. I'll usually add a little list of here's what's been added recently, and it'll have links right to those documents. So as new stuff comes up, and it could be right in the middle of a page you spent 4 hours reading, and suddenly there's like a whole new letter from Bao to Don Stevens that I just somehow didn't notice, or whatever it is. So yes, there's a little area where you can just put your email address in right here, and then you'll get notified every time there's a new blog. But if anyone has content, that's one thing I wanted to say. If you have photos you don't know what to do with, slides, if they're already scanned really well and you could just easily share them, that's great. But one thing that we realized getting into this, a lot of people are sitting on stuff and they don't know how to convert it, what to do with it, or even worse, they think they've converted it all because they put some low resolution thing on Facebook, and so they're done. And let me tell you, a lot of those you could never print. It would look terrible. They're very low, Facebook has a tendency to dumb them down and make them not high quality. So for long-term purposes, there's sort of a certain way to go about this, and there's definitely a certain way to set it up so that if you have a hard drive failure, it doesn't all just disappear. So if anyone has things like that. The other thing that's under development is the darshan. We have a great darshan section broken up by group. and anything you have stories or pictures to add to that, just there's a contact. Just contact us, and we'll help work it out.
Lord Mayor's section.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Madeline? Okay. Okay, so thank you, Mayor Legacy Project, and we'll be seeing more of that throughout the weekend.